Well, g'day. Welcome to our lunchtime seminar. Running a little bit late today, just getting a few things sorted out. But talking about what does it mean for you to become you? This is a really important topic. We're going to talk about the whole thing of spiritual formation. And right up the front, I want to say there's an assumption I am making, and that is you won't accidentally become you, and the you will accidentally become is an unhealthy version of you. You need to make choices about the person you become. So let's talk more about that. What do we mean by spiritual formation? Well, we mean what Jesus meant when he said, look, it doesn't really matter what you put in your mouth, it's what goes on in your heart. That's what matters, it's who you are. That often for us in the church, we focused on doing the right stuff and the externals, but it's not about that. What you do comes out of who you are. And who you are comes from the way you see the world. Now, it's not a conscious thing. In fact, your identity is, according to Dan McAdams, the Northwestern University psychology professor, the internalized and evolving story that results from a person's selective appropriation of past, present, and future. You think you know who you are, but actually what you know is a story. And there have been all kinds of different forces that have shaped your story. So when you say, I like this, or I don't like this, I'm good at this, or I'm not good at this, the things that, the information that has gone in to shape that has come from a range of different sources. And we want to talk today about how do you examine the forces that go in to form you and shape you. Because you are being formed and shaped. One of the things that neuroscience is showing us is that at all times, your picture of yourself is changing, and you are, someone once said, you are the same today as you will be next year, except for the people you associate with and the books you read. That's a massive oversimplification. But there's an element of truth in it, that you are shaped by the people you hang out with and by the ideas you let enter your life. But at the same time, there's a whole lot of ideas entering your life, and there are people you hang out with that you haven't particularly chosen. The reason people pay for advertising is that it is successful in getting you to change your behaviour in ways you may not even be conscious of. So at the most important question you will ever ask is, what is the story by which you live your life? What is the story by which you live your life? For most of us, in fact for all of us, at least elements of that story aren't even conscious. There is a story you believe, and it's not like you sat down and say, let's put a story together about how I'm going to live my life. It's not like that at all. What it is like is that as you were a little kid, you found that people acted to you in certain ways, and that helped you believe things about the world. And as you grew up, other things happened. You experienced pain in areas and success in other areas, and gradually you developed a story and you live out of that story. There is things that have shaped how you fundamentally see yourself. So we know this to be true. We know that if a teacher believes that their children, the students they're teaching, are intelligent, they generally speaking will do about 10% better than children who the teacher has no preconceived ideas about, and will do significantly better than children the teacher doesn't believe are intelligent. And it's got nothing to do with the children. It's to do with the messages that the teacher gives unconsciously to the children about what their expectations are. That we are shaped by the people we hang out with. The most effective and guaranteed way for you to lose weight is to be surrounded by friends who have lost weight. We are shaped by the people we hang out with. And because there is a story that is reinforced. And all of us live from a story. Now, one of the important things to be thinking about at the moment as we come up to the US election is we can see really clearly that the world people are living out of very different stories. And those stories are shaping the way they engage with the world, and there is a collision of stories happening in the United States at the moment, but more than that, there are all kinds of stories. And there are three features of every story. Every story tells us that there are people to love. What kind of people do you love? All stories say there are people to hate, and all stories say there is a version of what a good life looks like. These are the three elements of every story. So if you look at what Donald Trump and Joe Biden are fighting over at the moment, they have different versions of the people to love, people to hate, and what a good life looks like. And you have underlying assumptions in your life about people you can love and trust, people you need to be suspicious of and steer clear of, and what a good life looks like. So the most important question you can ask is, what is the story by which you live your life? Now, this is where I want to introduce you to the idea that being a follower of Jesus is not about being a good boy or girl. It's about fundamentally examining the story by which you'll live your life in light of who Jesus is, and letting his story change and affect who you are. To borrow from an author, James K.A. Smith, followers of Jesus are not born. They are made. They are shaped by Jesus' words and Jesus' choices, and it is a conscious choice to step into the story of who Jesus is. As Ananias Nin said, we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. Another way of demonstrating that is there is, in the world, there is a reality. Some people would, want to question that, but there is unquestionably a reality. And this is how it works for you. You do, in this reality, right now you are hearing me and you are seeing me. So you see and hear things. You see and hear all kinds of things. Apparently, in any one moment, there are like 10,000 bits of information bombarding your brain. You can't make sense of all the things you see and hear. So what do? You, on the basis of what you see and hear, and on the basis of your previous experience, there is a story that makes sense. There's a story. So there is a reality that you see and hear, and as you see and hear things, you see it through the grid of the story you already believe. And that story becomes kind of like a filter. So, the same two people can see someone holding a Black Lives Matter sign, and that data that they see and hear and those words mean two completely different things based on the story they believe. And as a result of the story they believe, we then feel things on the basis, not on the basis of reality, but on the basis of the story we believe. And then our actions come from our feelings. This is why Jesus is fundamentally interested in the story we believe. He said it's what's inside a person that makes them unclean. This is not the core issue. Your actions come from the story, and it is like a filter that gets in the road. So how do we evaluate our story? As we said, starting to think about it, we need to evaluate the people we hang out with. That's part of it. And we need to evaluate, to work this backwards. We need to say, okay, Jesus has given us lots of descriptions of what kind of actions should come from his story. Like loving our enemies is one kind of action that should come from his story. Or managing our sexuality in a way that doesn't cause problems for other people. Or learning to, James tells us we should be slow to speak, quick to listen, and slow to become angry. There's lots of different behaviours that come. And so what does it mean to begin to think about becoming free? It means starting to look at our actions and then starting to look at the stories we believe. And to see, okay, fundamentally, what are the stories we believe and where have they come from? Ultimately, you are shaped by what you love. You become what you love. So, the advertising industry is geared to get you to love stuff and to get you to focus on stuff that is not particularly healthy or helpful. But if one of the core questions for you is what story do you believe about what is of primary importance? I'm going to read to you from a secular author who won a Pulitzer Prize for his novels, but then later committed suicide because he lost hope. His name was David Foster Wallace. This is what he said. In the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there is no such thing as atheism. There is no such thing as not worshipping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. And an outstanding reason for choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing to worship is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money and things, if they're where you tap real meaning in life, then you will never have enough. Never feel you have enough. It's the truth. Worship your own body and beauty and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die a million deaths before they finally plant you. Worship power, and you will feel weak and afraid. You will need ever more power over others to keep the fear at bay. Worship your intellect, being seen as smart, and you'll end up feeling stupid, a fraud, always on the verge of being found out. The insidious thing about these forms of worship is not that they're evil or sinful, it's that they're unconscious. They're default settings. They're the kind of worship you just gradually slip into day after day, getting more and more selective about what you see and how you measure value without ever being fully aware of what you're doing. Do you hear what he's saying? And this is the dilemma for me, is that I'm talking to you about this. Even the words I'm saying right now, you are going to be hearing through the filter of the story you already believe. Through the filter of what you already love. You have a story that tells you what is of ultimate importance. And so for some of us, that story says, if only I can get people to look at me in a sexual kind of way, then I am okay. Or others are saying, if only I can have enough money, then I'll be okay. Or if only I can have enough power, then I'll be okay. That story, what he's saying, is ultimately is going to lead you to ruin. And that is what this secular novelist is saying. It's also what Jesus is saying. Jesus says, if you want to seek first your life, you will actually lose your life. And so there is this fundamental question. How do we become free of wrong stories? We've already had a bit of a glimpse of it. Partly it's who you hang out with, but it also, we need to become aware. We need to hold Jesus up as kind of a mirror. And James K.A. Smith says this: serious followers of Jesus are made and not born. They're formed by the stories, symbols, songs, and exemplars of the Christian experiment. In particular, it involves the internalization of the priorities, affections, and dispositions of Jesus of Nazareth. Do you get what he's saying? He's saying that fundamentally, Jesus' story has to replace the story your family told you about who you were as you grew up. It has to replace the pains you experienced in school as people laughed at you or you were bullied. It has to replace the successes you've had where you've got people to finally focus on you. It has to replace all those stories. James K. Smith goes on and he says, it's Jesus of Nazareth, he through whom God reveals most fully who God is and what God desires for us. The formative power of cultural narratives cannot be adequately met or countered with mere teaching. Counterformation requires countermeasures that capture our imagination and don't just convince our intellect, which is why what I'm doing right now, it's almost pointless, but I hope there's enough in it that you can glimpse something. Because just by words and teaching alone, it will not change who you are. What Smith is saying is that every day you are bombarded by all kinds of messages. You are being formed by all kinds of messages that are trying to tell you what is important, who you should love, and where your priorities should be. And unless you intentionally put yourself in a place of relationship where you'll get other kinds of messages, you won't change. And Dallas Willard came up with 3 words to describe the process of spiritual formation. He said, we need a vision, we need an intention, and we need means. He said, in order for you to change and become who you are created to be, you need to see things differently to how you currently see them. You need a vision of Jesus. Or if you're not wanting to become a follower of Jesus, what you will have, there'll be a vision you are working towards. So if you're a sports person, you might have another sports person in view. Or if you're trying to make money, you'll have a vision of what it might mean to make money. You need a picture of what you want to achieve. Then you need to decide, you need to make choices. You need to intend to change. And then you need a way that it's not good enough just to have a vision, and it's not good enough just to want to do something. You then need to be able to do it. And I want to talk about that being able to do it. So we've talked about the vision. The vision is Jesus. And the intention, I hope there's part of you that longs to be more like Jesus. The means, well, the means actually, I'd love to tell you that there's a conference you can go to that's going to change everything. The means is actually very basic. It's about your character. There's an ancient Indian proverb that says, sow a thought, reap an action. Sow an action, reap a habit. Sow a habit, reap a character. Sow a character, reap a destiny. Or as Aristotle put it, we are what we repeatedly do. And so, there are all kinds of messages wanting to flood in and tell you what's important. But ultimately, it is the little choices you make today that will be shaping your character. For me personally, it's been an interesting journey. I have not been someone who likes exercise. And I have to work really hard at it. I'm not naturally good at it. So over the last year or so, I've been choosing to get up and go off to the gym. COVID really, like many people, COVID wrecked a lot of my habits, so I'm having to develop that habit again. We're getting up at 6 a.m. and heading off and trying to survive for half an hour on a treadmill. But what I'm noticing is, after about a year or so doing it, it is getting a little bit. I'm never going to be a morning person. I'm never going to like exercise, but it is getting a little bit easier to get up when the alarm goes off. And it is actually changing my character. Similarly, I, for a long time, used to struggle to have time with God. And I didn't know how to do it. And I discovered that if you can connect something you regularly do with something you want to do, then it makes it easier to build a habit. So I figured, well, there is something I need to do every morning. I need to have a cup of coffee. And so by connecting my cup of coffee with spending time with God, I started to build a habit of building time with God in the mornings. So when it boils down to it, there's a few things. I'd like to talk more about spiritual formation, and we'll keep doing it. But the reason we're doing it here is we're talking about what it means to find your purpose. And for you to find your purpose, you need to develop healthy habits, lots of little habits that lead you in the right way, and you need to face the unhealthy habits that lead you in the wrong way. And there are three. Did you know that habits are made up of three different things? There is what they call the cue. There is what they call the routine. And then there's what they call the reward. All habits are made up of three things. Something that triggers, you hear a lot about trigger warnings these days, don't you? All your habits are based on triggers. where something happens and then you automatically do something else. Now, one of the useful things to know is that there is only a limited number of cues that there can be. It will either be a place. So when you are lying, like for me, as I lie down in bed, I habitually put my, I don't really think about it anymore, I put my watch on the stand so it's charging, and I've got my earpods there, and I just quickly do one last check of messages and that kind of thing, put my phone away, and there's things that happen without me thinking about it. Similarly, as I get in the car, without me even thinking about it, I put my seatbelt on, I turn the ignition, I can't remember exactly the order because it's all habit. So location is one of the cues. A time of day. You'll notice, so if you notice that for you, depending on whatever time your meal times are, your body can click into gear saying, okay, it's time for food. And so time of day can be a cue. Your emotional state. You might find that whenever you are upset, you've developed a habit of eating food. And so the cue is the emotional state, and the habit is, and the routine is eating food. You might find that there are other people. You might find that if somebody says a particular kind of thing, it triggers something else for you. Or if someone, you'll have developed stereotypes in your head about what this kind of person likes, or what this person how this kind of person might act, and so they might trigger. As you see, if you were bullied as a kid and you see someone who looks a little bit like, or reminds you in some way, even unconsciously, of the bully, then the chances are you're going to back off from them, and you'll have a habitual response, even though you're not conscious of it. I'm
not sure I understand.
Thanks, Siri. And the final cue is a preceding action. I don't know how this works. I don't know if this works the same for you, but when I turn the car off, an ignition, I turn the car off, pull on the handbrake, release my seatbelt, wind down, check the window. Like, there's about 5 things that just kind of happen, one after the other. I can't even tell you what they are, but one triggers the next, triggers the next, triggers the next. And these are what they call the cues. And then there is the routine that comes as a result of the cues, and then there's the reward. There's a book called The Power of Habit by a guy called Charles Duhigg, and I'd recommend you get into it, because ultimately spiritual formation is about building habits. But more than that, it's building habits in the context of a community that reminds you about what's important. So you need to surround yourself. In a healthy community, there's always one person who's a step ahead of you, until, eventually there might not be, and that person will be Jesus. But ultimately, in a healthy community, I love seeing the kids in our church play together, and then the slightly older kids looking after the younger kids, and the teenagers looking after those kids, and then the young adults keeping an eye out for the teenagers. That's what a healthy community is meant to be like. So for you are not accidentally going to become a follower of Jesus Christ. What needs to happen is you need to look at your behaviour, your habits, you need to look at the stories you believe, and you need to look at the people you surround yourself with. You are going to become like the people you surround yourself with, and you'll start to believe the kinds of things they believe unless you make conscious choices. And this is where the danger of social media, I would recommend looking at the Social Dilemma documentary on Netflix. It's well worth watching and a little scary. If we surround ourselves with people who think like us, we are not forced to grow. We're not forced to examine the stories that are at the heart of our lives, that we live our life from. I am interested. I know for me, I'm on a journey to become free. And my understanding of the Christian church is that it's meant to be a mob of people who help each other become free. My hope and prayer for you is that you would take the time, if you remember the diagram that was back here, to examine your behaviour. Examine it in the light of who Jesus is and the story he tells. And to gradually, not just beat yourself up when you're not doing the wrong thing, but work out what is the story you believe, usually unconsciously, that leads you to act in that kind of way. And watch what Jesus does. He will take your hand and lead you through experiences that challenge your story. Have you noticed that? Jesus wants to take you through experiences that challenge the story you live from. For me, it's this continual journey in my life. You know, I remember I was prejudiced against Muslim people. I couldn't believe that human beings could be Muslims. And it was really important for me to get to know some Muslim people and see, while I believe that ultimately they need Jesus, it was really good for me to get to see their hearts and know who they are and learn how beautiful they were, that all people are created in the image of God. Similarly, I don't know if I should admit this, but I was working in a mission organisation outside the church, and I'd often get really frustrated with pastors and church leadership. And God had to take me on a journey to face a lot of that stuff, and I end up as a pastor, which has been an interesting journey for me. That I've had pictures of what a woman is, and my wife has gradually had to teach me slowly and gently that I don't have a clue, and that I need to re-understand my attitudes towards women. And gradually, you know, Jesus will take you through experiences where your stories are challenged in the light of his story. If you're open to it, he will surround you with people who don't think like you. This is where the church is meant to be. The church is meant to be full of people who are different, not people who think the same. People who don't act and talk and think the same. That is if you're in a place where people don't have conflict, you are not in a healthy place. Because we need to be surrounded by people who we care about, but who are different to us. And similarly, we need to look at our habits. Look at the things we do unconsciously, because following Jesus is much more about the stuff we do when we're not thinking, than the stuff that we do when we are thinking. It's not about trying hard. It's about developing character, developing the habits of character. There's a couple of books I'd recommend. The Renovation of the Heart by Dallas Willard is a really good book. And You Are What You Love by James K.A. Smith. Those two books, along with The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, that ultimately, if the church is to help you find the story that God has for you, it will happen as you let Jesus challenge the story you are living out of, the beliefs you have, and reorder your priorities. That if you want to stay safe and comfortable, if you want to continue to believe many of the things you believe and live out of, you will not step into the story God has for you. Jesus is going to take you through an ongoing journey of repentance, which literally means getting a new head. And he will gradually be shaping you to be more and more like him. So you want to do the things he did and said, and it will be natural for you to act more and more like Jesus. You won't have to put it on. It won't be an act. It'll be just who you are. That is what spiritual formation is all about. We are being formed all the time by the world around us. but ultimately Jesus is inviting us to step into a new life and a free life. And we're going to talk more next week in this seminar time about how you do self-management. How do you manage yourself? How do you make choices? But can I encourage you, take some time to reflect on what is the story you are living out of and how does it shape your responses. I might just pray for us if that's okay. Jesus, it's such an important question for all of us. We are trapped by the wrong stories we believe, by the lies we believe. I pray for my brothers and sisters watching this. Help us, Jesus. Please live from truth. Help us see where the stories we are living from take us away from your truth. And help us become freer and freer. Form us so that we want to be more like you, not because we feel like we have to do it, but just because that's who you created us to be. Help my brothers and sisters, help me, Jesus, be more like you and step into the life you have for us. I ask this in your name. Amen. Thanks for hanging out with us, and we'll see you every morning. We do a bit of a devotion here on the Facebook feed. Sundays we live stream church, and then also we're doing these seminars, and next week we're actually going to be talking about self-management and what it means to set priorities and organise yourself to head in the direction that God has for you. We'll talk about that next week.